The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Wednesday night. I hope everybody's having a great week so far. And I am recovering from jet lag, I think. I'm almost there. By the time I recover, I'll be on a plane again, but that is life. All right, today we're going to be talking about Gorbachev. Some of you are too young to remember or know who Gorbachev was. Luckily for you, I'm not too young to remember that, so I'll tell you. And we'll talk about Biden's college loan forgiveness program and all its moral and economic wonders. Let's see. Catherine is back. Catherine Mendez is back. So we're going to see today if there is a Catherine effect, because I'd say the last few shows we've kind of struggled to reach our goals from a Super Chat perspective, and Catherine's not being here, so maybe it was the Catherine effect. So we're going to test that today. We'll see if the fact that Catherine is here gets you excited and motivated to get us going on the Super Chat. Of course, you can use the Super Chat to ask me a question about anything you want. And you could cover anything. The more dollars you put on the question, the earlier in the show I will respond. I try to get to all the questions, including the $2 ones. So feel free to ask $2 questions. It just takes longer to get there. I see some of the questions already flowing in. I guess there is a Catherine effect. Catherine, you're amazing. Jonathan, thank you. I really appreciate you getting us started there. Jonathan Honig, a capitalist pig, and the editor of the book on Americanism, the must read on Americanism. All right, so we have gotten rolling with the Super Chat. I appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. Remember, to get to 650, we need a lot of like $20, $50, $100, $200 kind of questions to really get to that number. Hopefully we can make it. If you are on Twitter and you don't mind, go over to Twitter and just let the world know that we're live. Maybe we can bump up the live listener numbers, which will also help us reach our goals as well. And of course, before you leave the show, before you give up, or you have to run or you have to do something else, click the like button if you like the show. It really helps us with the algorithm. It helps us with YouTube. It helps us elevate the show in the YouTube algorithm. So it's a way to beat the algorithm. The algorithms that suppress ideas that are not mainstream, and certainly you have to admit, my ideas are not mainstream. All right, so let's get started. Before we get actually to Gorbachev's, he died yesterday, he died, 91 years old. Let's talk about somebody else who died in Russia recently. I didn't mention it on the show because I haven't been doing shows, and I think this is while I was away. But you all remember I did a show which a lot of people listened to, so thank you for that. It was one of the more popular shows over the last month. We did a show on Alexander Dugin a while ago, which I think was a very popular show, where we delved into the evil philosophy of Alexander Dugin and his influence both within Russia and outside of Russia on conservatives all over the place. Anyway, there was an assassination attempt in Moscow on Alexander Dugin. And at the last minute, it turns out that he switched cars with his daughter. And he actually took another car, and his daughter was in a car that blew up and killed her. She was 25 years old. She was a media star. She was very much a Duginite. Is that a term? A Duginite? A adherent to the mystical, authoritarian, postmodernist, gibbly-goo philosophy that Dugin upheld, a kind of a supra-Russian, authoritarian empire, and she advocated for all of those ideas and was active in Russian media advocating for them. Her father was not very popular in the media itself, but she was, and she died in his stead. Nobody really knows who killed her. The Russians, of course, blaming the Ukrainians. That would be convenient for them, and maybe it was, for all I know, Ukrainian spies within Moscow who did this. But it very much could be Russians themselves. It could be, pro-liberal, pro-freedom Russians. It could be, on the other hand, it could be certain nationalists who felt threatened by Dugin. Who knows? I mean, who knows the internal machinations, the internal power struggle that happened within Russia. But certainly Dugin was not universally loved or universally appreciated. He made a lot of enemies during his life. And it's sad that his daughter died. I wouldn't have been so sad if he had died. He holds evil ideas and is not somebody whose death I would mourn. Your own book, on the Your Own Book Show, you get the way I feel about things, right? But it is curious and it is interesting that this happened in Moscow. And it does suggest maybe that there is some kind of internal power struggle going on in Russia, that everybody's not clearly united, and maybe even Putin felt threatened by Dugin, in a sense that Dugin was criticizing Putin for being too weak, being too slow, and not being aggressive enough in the war in Ukraine and more broadly. So maybe this is Putin's effort to silence Dugin. Really hard to tell, but it is interesting. That this is happening. So some of you are saying, oh, it's really sad that she had to die. She didn't deserve it. Others are saying she was evil too. Yeah, I mean, she was evil. She was 25 years old. She wasn't a little kid. She was responsible for her beliefs and responsible for aligning herself with her father. Just because he's a father does not mean that she had to agree with him and support his ideas. So clearly, she upheld evil ideas and is morally responsible for those ideas. But she is not the originator of those ideas. She is not on the scale of Dugin. She didn't have the influence. She didn't have the power. In that sense, she didn't deserve to die. But look, war right now in Ukraine is killing a lot of 25-year-olds. If we're going to mourn anybody, I would mourn the young Ukrainians who are dying on the battlefield, who are dying in their homes, or young, old, middle-aged Ukrainians are dying because of the ideas, the kind of ideas that Dugin is advocating for, the kind of ideas that she advocated for. So the real victims here are the thousands of people dying in Ukraine right now. One Russian who promoted this war, advocated for this war, thought the war was too soft, that more Ukrainians needed to be killed. I'm not going to mourn her too much. Given that, I would have preferred Dugin, but it is what it is. What intrigues me more, is these kind of power struggles, what is actually going on in Russia, how much power does Putin have, is there opposition to him, is the opposition to him coming from his right or from his left, in a sense of, is it coming from even more radical, crazy nationalists like Dugin, or is it coming from more liberal forces, more pro-freedom forces, less eager for war? I don't know. I don't know about internal Russian politics. I don't know that anybody knows at this point exactly what's going on there, but it'll be interesting. To see what it was. All right. So yeah, I just thought I'd fill you in on the Dugin daughter assassination. Certainly an interesting story, and I don't know if we'll ever know what actually happened and who's actually responsible. Okay, let's talk about Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev was the last leader of communist Russia, the last leader of the Soviet Union. He will go down in history as such. He led the Soviet Union between 1985 and 1991. He was the most senior member of the Russian Communist Party. And he died, I think it was today or yesterday. I can't figure it out. Now, this is a man who is now celebrated by the media as he brought freedom to Eastern Europe. He liberated East Germany. He liberated the Russian republics. I think this is a massive injustice. He's portrayed by much of Western media today as a hero. A hero for not sending the tanks in when demonstrators flooded the streets in Eastern Germany. A hero for not killing thousands of innocent people in his attempt to preserve a Soviet Union. A hero in recognizing that the Soviet Union was dead and was going to break up. None of that is heroic. It's not heroic not to kill people. It's not heroic not to slaughter them. It's not heroic to let history take its course, or to let the people, not history, history sounds deterministic, people take action to liberate themselves. I mean, yes, it was the right thing to do. Good for him. But this is a man who spent his entire life as part of a communist apparatus that killed millions. Now, granted, he became a apparatchik within the Communist Party in Russia, in the Soviet Union after Stalin, so maybe he wasn't responsible for the killing of millions and millions, but he was responsible for the killings of a lot of people. That system was that he was a part of, that he was a member of, that he never really rejected. When asked to release Natan Sharansky, one of the dissidents who were imprisoned in Russia during the 1980s, he went on a rant about how evil this guy was and deserved his fate. People forget, or maybe they just don't want to remember. Then when Kazakhstan in 1986, when protesters went to the streets in Kazakhstan as part of the Soviet Union back then, Gorbachev ordered the troops out, leaving 200 people dead. Or that when the Georgians in Tbilisi went out into the streets, it was Gorbachev who ordered the troops out to quash the pro-independence protests in April of 1989, leaving 21 people dead. Or that in Azerbaijan, the pro-independence movement in 1990 left 147 dead when they cracked down on it. Or the fact that he cracked down on movements in Latvia and Lithuania. Yes, Gorbachev did not order the troops out in 1989 in East Berlin, when clearly thousands would have been killed, and where the fate of the Soviet Union was already kind of in the cards. But he held on to the dream of keeping it together. He held on and tried to keep it as one. Yes, Gorbachev, in an attempt to save a crumbling, decadent system, a system that was impoverishing his own people, in an effort to somehow keep up with the United States, to somehow keep up with Ronald Reagan's military spending. Yes, he freed up a little bit politically, and he freed up a little bit economically, and he had Glasnost and Petroiska a little bit. But only because his hands were tied, only because he had no choice, only because the Soviet Union around him was crumbling, decadent, dying, corrupt, poor, inefficient, incompetent. Sound like Russia today, maybe? A little bit. This is no hero. This is a man with blood in his hands, a political leader thrust into the moment that, yes, good for him. He recognized it would be futile at that point to send the troops into the streets. Did he release political prisoners in the 1980s? No. Did he stop arresting people who were dissidents? No. He was, in many ways, outmaneuvered by President Reagan. He was losing the economic battle, or the economic battle as he saw it with the United States. He was losing the military race with the United States. But it wasn't even him who was losing it. It had been lost decades earlier. Communism had lost it. Was he a committed communist? Yes. He later, after he lost power, after he resigned, became a social democrat. Oh, Troy, thank you. Really appreciate the support. Troy's come in on the last day of the year. Maybe it's because Catherine is here to help us get to our goal today. So thank you, Troy. So let's not fall into this ridiculous idea that a communist who loosens communism up a little bit because has no option. Lenin did the same thing, by the way. And Gorbachev was a big fan of Lenin's. He did the same thing. Lenin in the 1920s allowed for some private property, allowed for a little bit of economic privatization. You see that in We the Living. You see that in Ayn Rand's life. He even allowed some Russians to leave Russia, as Ayn Rand did. So he was just following the Leninist map. Yeah, you liberate a little bit, but you're not going to give up the reins of power. You're not going to give up control. Nope, I don't think Putin had Gorbachev. I think Gorbachev's 91 years old. I think he's been sick for a long time. He died, he died of natural causes, and so no, I don't think. I don't think Putin had anything to do with Gorbachev's dying. Again, he's been sick for a long time. So, it just shows the tolerance our media, our intellectuals have for communism. I mean, any small-scale fascist is denied forever. Doesn't matter what they do. Doesn't matter what virtues they might have had, maybe some way, did something good. They're denounced forever. But communists, no matter how much blood they have in their hands, no matter how authoritarian, no matter how evil, how awful, maybe with the exception of Stalin, are forgiven. Are forgiven. And indeed, when they don't send the troops out to kill thousands of people, they're the good guys. They're heroes. Our world is perverse. Communism is still viewed as a moral ideal. Impractical, impossible, counter to human nature, they would say. But isn't it a beautiful dream? No, it's an ugly dream. It's a horrible dream. I don't wish the dream on anybody. And just dreaming that dream, moving towards that dream, leads to disaster, leads to poverty, leads to the collapse of freedom. So don't buy into it. If they are heroes of the fall of the Soviet Union, if they are heroes that have to do with the disintegration of the Soviet Union, it is Soviet dissidents who are the heroes. Solzhenitsyn, as much as I disagree with much of his philosophy, is a hero of the fall of the Soviet Union, as are all the other dissidents who wrote against communism, wrote against the Soviet Union, were punished for it. It is people like Lech Walesa, who in the early 1980s rose up against the communist regime in Poland, organized labor unions, organized protests, started challenging the absolute power of the communist regimes in Eastern Europe. It is the young people of East Germany who in 1989 marched to the wall and knocked it down. It is the people in the Czech Republic who months earlier were already going out into the streets demanding change. It is the people all over Eastern Europe who stood up and challenged the authorities, who challenged communism, who challenged authoritarianism. They are the heroes. The people who didn't send the tanks into the streets, good that they didn't. Nothing heroic about that. That's just common decency. Don't kill your neighbors. It's the people who died in Azerbaijan and in Georgia and in Azerbaijan, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Latvia, Lithuania, before they decided not to send the troops into the streets. They are the heroes. And political leaders, it's the political leaders who challenged the Russians. Now, I don't think they had a huge role, but Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan certainly had a role. Ronald Reagan primarily as just a moral leader, as using the bully pulpit, as providing energy and moral confidence and moral sanction to the Lech Walesas of the world, to the people in these countries who are challenging this authority by telling them, yes, it is an evil empire. Yes, the wall should be torn down. Yes, you are just, they are not. That moral certainty, that moral courage motivated people. It had a massive impact. Imagine if, I don't know, Donald Trump had done that in 2020 as the Russians were taking over China. Imagine if he'd taken a moral stand on the side of Hong Kong. If he'd encouraged them, if he'd promoted them, if he'd given them any kind of backbone. Our moral leaders today, you know, Ronald Reagan is very flawed, and as you know, I think Ayn Rand despised Reagan, was very anti-Reagan, did not vote for Reagan, even when he faced a challenge from, when he challenged a complete horrible president, Jimmy Carter. Rand could not vote for him. But man, is he head, shoulders, body, whatever, above anybody who has been president since, again, in spite of his major flaws, which we are suffering from today, the bringing in of religion into the Republican Party. So Gorbachev was probably better than the people who came before him. Gorbachev was no Stalin. He's no Lenin. I don't know what, Soviet leaders just before Gorbachev would have done. It's hard to tell. Maybe impossible to tell. He should get some credit for the fact that he didn't do the worst thing possible. But we, who understand what heroism, or should understand what heroism is, we who understand the extent to which communism was evil, and the participants in communism was evil. Remember, Gorbachev was part of the Central Committee, I think from the mid-1970s until, or maybe late 1970s to 1985. He was part of the Communist Party, every aspect of it. He does not get a free ride. He does not get redeemed. If there was a hell, he should still go to hell, in spite of the fact that he did the right thing by not sending the tanks out in '89, and not, because of his incompetence mainly, not keeping the Soviet Union together. Vladimir Putin, by the way, was a massive critic of Gorbachev exactly for that reason. Putin believed that one of the greatest geopolitical disasters of the 20th century was the breakup of the Soviet Union, and to a large extent he blamed Gorbachev for it. Putin, obviously Putin was not a fan. All right, so just wanted to bring that out. Again, I don't know how many of you know the history. Let's see. We have a few questions related to this. Colt Savage says, if you and Shapiro have been critical of Gorbachev today, and part of me just thinks, both you and Shapiro have been critical of Gorbachev today, and part of me just thinks, yeah, he wasn't good, but he was better than the turds who came before him and the turds who came after him. I know it's not a good way to think. I don't think he's better than the people who came after him. Maybe he's better than Putin. I don't know if he's better than Yeltsin. I mean, it's a whole different world. I don't know what Yeltsin would have done in his place. But he was bad. He was not as bad. Okay. So he's not as bad. I don't think that's a qualification for the kind of, aggrandizement that is going on in the media around him, and they're calling him heroic and so on. PVM Corp, Hurricane Catherine. So I think his $20 is because Catherine is around. So thank you, PVM Corp. Okay, Frank says, please talk about the summit that Gorbachev had with Reagan in Iceland to discuss nuclear weapons. What was the deal that was on the table? I can't remember. There was a good story around that summit. Fundamentally, I think the story is that Reagan basically humiliated Gorbachev in the summit. He was strong, he was tough, he was, and he basically caused Gorbachev to go back home, with real doubts and second thoughts about what he could do and how he could survive. It was about, the summit was around, another weapons deal, a deal to dismantle nuclear weapons. But I think it had to do with Star Wars, with Reagan's effort around launching a satellite-based anti-ballistic missile program. The Russians could not match American technology, were nowhere near. It's not clear that the Americans had the technology, but certainly the Russians didn't. I think that really put Gorbachev on the defensive. And generally, again, with all of Reagan's faults, he knew how to project strength. He knew how to argue from a position of strength. he did exactly the opposite of what our leaders today, certainly Obama, Trump, Biden, have been able to do. I'd include Bush in that as well. Have been able to do in terms of dealing with bad guys in the world. I do not think Gorbachev suggested to do away with all nukes, certainly not without significant attachments. I can look that up and research that, but I do not believe that was part of the deal or that was ever offered really in a serious way. So I don't think that was part of it, and I don't think Gorbachev actually believed in that. He just like, he yep. Oops, how do I delete that? Let's go to this. All right, undo, all right. All right, let's, Fred Harper says, any good books on Russian history you could recommend? Unfortunately not. I just can't remember any, and I don't know that I've read any recently. I mean, Russia's got an interesting history because it went through a short period of time where there's a real effort to bring Enlightenment ideas in, but it was done from the top down, very much from the top down. Two czars, Catherine the Great and Peter the Great, both tried to bring Enlightenment values and Enlightenment ideas into Russia. But they did it in an authoritarian way. They did it by top-down, let's have science, and it didn't stick. It never really sticked. It never really changed the culture. It never really changed the essence of Russian culture, civilization. It would be good, actually. It would be good to read. Yeah, we do have our own great Catherine the Great, Catherine Mendez the Great. Good idea, Robin. But Catherine Mendez is a lot better. Catherine the Great was a very mixed character. Peter the Great was awful in many respects. I mean, Peter built St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg was a city that was built in Western style with Western architecture. It was going to be it was established as a new capital. Moscow was abandoned. St. Petersburg became the capital. It was going to be the Western capital of Russia. It was going to be the thing that transitioned Russia into the West. It was he started a scientific academy. He hired Western philosophers to come in St. Petersburg and teach and lecture, scientists and all of this stuff. But if you think about how he built the city, this is how brutal authoritarians try to bring people ideas of enlightenment. He basically took a swamp and he brought hundreds of thousands of Russians there and they built a city out of nothing. Hundreds of thousands of Russians died building it. It didn't matter because individual people don't matter. And at the end of the day, the Enlightenment wasn't really for the peasants, wasn't really for the workers. And so St. Petersburg is this amazing city, beautiful city, very European city, very, quote, enlightened city, built literally on the skeletons and the bodies of hundreds of thousands of serfs, which Peter the Great thought were expendable in his big project. To hell with them. And that's Russian history for you. And the Russian present. Not just the history, but it's the present as well. So, no, I don't have any good books on Russian history. I wish I did. And it is a topic that the more I dig into, the more interesting I become in it. But, I'm interested in so many different things, and I'm so behind on so many different books. We'll get to it. In the new newsletter we're going to launch, my plan is to kind of list the books I'm reading. So I just finished a really good book on the Enlightenment that I'll list in the next newsletter. And I'm in the middle of reading a really good book on the whole trans phenomena from a British philosopher. I learned about this book from the Ayn Rand Institute, who did a session on this. It's really well written so far and really interesting. And it's about how these ideas that have driven what we today have is this just phenomena of a trans ideology, that is everywhere and is dominant, she really maps it out and she challenges that ultimately philosophically, now from an objectivist perspective, a pretty rational perspective, and it's quite good. So I will also let you know more about that book as we go along. So a book on Russian history is somewhere on that list. I've got a long list of books I want to read, a long list. All right, let's see. All right. Okay, so I answered that. So let's go to college loan forgiveness. I mean, this has been rumored for a long time that Biden was going to do it. This was a big on the agenda of the Democratic Party for a number of years now. This is something that was expected. Biden was under a huge amount of pressure from the left wing of the party to fulfill this as an election promise. This is something that the Elizabeth Warrens of the world were pushing for and have been pushing for a very, very long time. They really wanted, and Elizabeth Warren had proposed in her campaign to do away with all student debt, to write it all off, to go down to zero. Ultimately, what they really want is for the government to fund all education. Biden wasn't quite willing to do that. I think even Biden, or at least his economic advisors, realized the devastating economic consequences of such a plan. Maybe they even have an inkling of the moral consequences, but I doubt it because it seems like almost nobody has those kind of inklings. So basically what's happened is if you make less than $125,000 in 2021 or 2020, if as a couple you made less than $250,000 during one of those tax years, you're eligible to write off up to $20,000 of student debt. That is government student debt, although almost all student debt today is government student debt. The $20,000 is available for those who had Pell Grants. Pell Grants are giving to low-income individuals. Pell Grants are one of the things that they've tried to write off. And, if they really wanted to help poor people, if their goal was really just to help poor people who got a college education, they would have just written off all Pell Grants. I don't know what the number is there, but they just would have written that off. $10,000 is the cap for regular student loans that people get that were not Pell Grants. But there is this income issue. What to make of this? Well, it's horrible policy from every perspective, right? It doesn't really help the Democrats that much electorally, other than they can say they fulfilled an election promise. Because most college graduates, most people who graduate from four-year colleges certainly, have college graduates vote Democratic overwhelmingly. Now, it is true that many of the people who are going to benefit from this, maybe more than 50%, it's not clear exactly, don't actually have four-year degrees. They might have dropped out of college. They might have two-year degrees. They might be in college right now. They might be grad students who haven't graduated yet. But again, if you're grad students, you're probably a Democrat. So it's not clear that this is a huge political win in terms of buying votes. It certainly, fulfills an election promise, and he can say he did that, and the left is maybe more motivated to come out and vote for him because of it. But there's some huge costs here. Maybe they're not political, and maybe all they care about is politics. But there are economic costs, and there's a massive moral costs here that are important. It's interesting because all you really hear from Republicans and conservatives about this is, or not all you hear, but most of what you hear is about the economic costs. It's going to cost the U.S. economy between $400 and $600 billion. Now, why is that? How do you measure that? What does it mean that it'll cost it? Well, what happens today is that students pay their loans back with interest. The government takes that money and it spends it on other stuff. But it's going to spend it on other stuff anyway. So if the government suddenly is not getting that money because of this loan forgiveness, then it has to take on more debt in order to fund the stuff it's going to spend the money on anyway. Now, it's important to note that over the last, 2.5 years now, student loans have not been repaid because there's been a moratorium on student loans. It was put in place by Trump, another brilliant program by Trump, and never taken away. Biden's not going to take that away. I mean, supposedly it'll end in January, and at that point they'll write down the 10,000 or the 20,000, however much it is. But students haven't been paying their debt. Whatever that income the Treasury would have and has had in the past is no longer there. And as a consequence of that, by that amount, the Treasury has to borrow money and thus increase the deficit, increase the borrowing, suck money out of the private economy. They're not sucking money out of the private economy by taking it from students. They're sucking money out of the private economy by selling bonds to whoever is willing to buy them. Either way, it's harmful for the U.S. economy. So you're exchanging one type of taking money out of the hands of individuals with another. But the deficit is increasing. The deficit has to be paid. Future generations are either going to have to pay higher taxes or going to suffer from higher inflation in order to be able to get rid of all this debt that the government is taking on, a piece of which, small, but a significant piece, is the student debt forgiveness that has passed. This is potentially inflationary to the extent that you believe that debt is, and the government's signaling to the world that it's never going to pay you back its debt. If you believe that is inflationary, then it certainly seems that this would be inflationary in a sense that it creates inflation expectations sometime in the future, because if they don't pay back the debt, well, then they're going to have to inflate. There's no other way to get rid of the debt. It's either through inflation or through default. There's no inflation, default, or paying it back, raising taxes. And if what you're getting here is a declaration that we're never going to pay back the debt, we're forgiving debt, so we're taking on more deficits, government is never going to pay back its debts, that is potentially inflationary. So that's kind of the economic consequences. There's all kinds of moral hazard consequences. You've forgiven this debt. What about other debt? Other markets now going to expect bailouts now. Government has bailed out banks. They bailed out. We'll get to PPP loans in a minute, but they bailed out all kinds of businesses out there. Why not students? Government bails out the poor. Food stamps, welfare is a big bailout. The left validly argues that government provides subsidies to businesses. So yes, it's part of the problem of arguing just over this. Government should stop bailing out everybody. Government should get out of the business of bailing anybody out, the business of subsidizing anybody, the business of trying to manipulate our behavior through taxes and bailouts. But the criticism, even with regard to this, needs to be more comprehensive. The fundamental problem here is not the college loan forgiveness. The fundamental problem here is that government gives student loans to begin with. That is the real perversion. That is the real distortion. That is what is causing tuition to go through the roof. That is what is causing students to be unmoored from reality in terms of what they study in school. That is what is perverting higher education spending and higher education priorities and higher education engagement. The federal government, I mean all government, but we're focused on the federal government right now, should just get out of education. And that primarily involves student financing of education. Now, the government has for many decades been guaranteeing student loans. So the worry was, banks won't give students loans to go to college. And this is primarily a problem for poor kids who are then at a disadvantage because they can't go to expensive colleges. So what we need to do is we need to incentivize banks to give college loans. So what the government did is basically subsidize these loans. They went to the banks and gave them guarantees and subsidized them and encouraged banks to give loans to primarily poor students who couldn't pay them back, because the banks were going to give loans to middle class and rich students, or they were also going to give loans to kids who were smart, kids who scored high in tests, kids who would probably get a degree in an income-earning profession, kids who had a future. And therefore the bank had a certain confidence that they would get paid back. What a concept. So the government came to the banks and said, don't worry about whether they can pay back or not. Give loans to everybody. We'll guarantee the loans. It also got into the business of giving out these kind of Pell Grants and other kind of grants to low-income students to make sure that the students would go to college. And as a consequence of all this, college enrollment skyrocketed. And of course, college tuition skyrocketed. Because why is college tuition skyrocketed? Because no matter what the tuition was going to be, the student could always get a loan. The bank, going back 15 years, the bank didn't worry about, ooh, this tuition is really high. Are you ever going to be able to pay it back? Because they knew they had a government guarantee. So no matter, every time the universities raised their tuition, students kept coming. They raised them again. Students kept coming. They raised them again. Students kept coming. Why? Because they kept getting loans and grants. And the more the government got involved in higher education, the higher tuition got. Surprise, surprise. When the government buys a hammer, it pays a lot more than when I buy a hammer. They don't go to Walmart. They don't go to Home Depot. It's not their money. So the fundamental, one of the fundamental problems in American education is the government funding of the educational system. It's, almost better just to pay for the education, but to give these loans. You're incentivizing the universities to increase tuition ad infinitum. You're creating a problem for the students being able to pay it back, but yet the government is guaranteeing all the loans, so the lenders continue to lend. And then Obama comes along. And what's amazing about this is when Obama did this, there was very little criticism of him. It was the right was so obsessed with Obamacare. This kind of flew under the radar. Obama basically said, and I'm sure a lot of economists supported this, he said, and it makes a lot of sense, really, from a statist perspective. Look, we're already guaranteeing these loans. We're already on the hook for all of them. Why do we need the banks? Why do we need the middleman? Why do we need these extra expenses? Why do we need bankers making a profit? We should get the profit. We're guaranteeing the loans. So basically what Obama did, and I can't remember the year, is he brought all student loans into the government. The government would provide all the loans. Banks had no role anymore. And whatever discipline banks might have had in not giving loans maybe to a gender studies student who was going to get into debt with $250,000 or whatever, went out the window. And now the government gives loans to anybody who submits, anybody who applies, anybody who wants them. And that means tuition explodes, continues to explode. It also means people go and study stupid things and get money to study for it. It means debt goes through the roof. And a complete distortion and perversion of the American higher educational system. Because our universities, even though they complain bitterly about not having money, are flush. They don't know what to do with the money. You know, some of the dormitories and the cafeterias at these universities are just unbelievable in terms of the quality that they provide students. They build beautiful buildings, beautiful sports facilities. What they don't provide is an education. So the fundamental problem here is government involvement in education, government financing of education with no limit. No limit. It's not like they give every student, imagine if they gave every student a voucher, I don't know, $5,000 and you can go spend it on anything. That would be better. That would be better than giving them loans, making the students pay their loan back, but the loan is unlimited in terms of its size. With $5,000, you'd at least get some competition. Universities would try to attract that $5,000, and then the student would have to bring, I don't know, bank financing or some other financing to bear on the decision, right? And maybe then these high tuition students will suddenly realize, wait a minute, I really can't afford this. Particularly if I'm going to study gender studies, because it turns out that a bank, a rational bank, would charge interest rates on a gender study graduate of, I don't know, 20%, whereas if you are in STEM, the interest rate might only be 4%. But that's discrimination. Yes, I'm all for discrimination based on risk, based on ability to repay. So, yeah, it's a crazy world out there. I don't see enough of this kind of critique of, you don't see enough of this critique of the actual loan program among Republicans. They're so focused on, the economic damage. They're even focused on, you could argue the moral case, but the one aspect of it, which is, well, I paid my loans back already. I got, I feel screwed because I didn't get any of this benefit. How, it's not fair. Some people get it, some people don't. No, I mean, that's not fair. You're right, but that's true of any new government program where they're giving out handouts. Some people get them and some people didn't because they don't qualify. If they have a new farm subsidies, which Republicans love to vote for, what about the farmers who planted those seeds 5 years ago? How come they didn't get a subsidy and now they do? That's not fair either. There's nothing fair about government subsidizing, government taxing, government involvement in the economy. The immorality is fundamentally government involvement in financing education. That's the immorality. Let private charities, let banks, let financial institutions worry about that. There are loans that financial institutions do where they basically give you, and I think some of the government loans are like this now, where they basically give you a loan and they collect a percentage of your future earnings. And now they have an incentive for you to finish your education, to encourage that. They have an incentive to make sure you go study something you can make a living off of. Maybe that would change the dynamics within academia if that incentive actually existed. So the whole thing is despicable and ridiculous and absurd and a reflection of everything that is wrong with government involvement. And of course, it's massively immoral because you're basically redistributing wealth from people who are not getting degrees to people who are getting degrees, trying to get a degree. You're penalizing people who haven't. You penalize people who got degrees in the past and who were responsible and paid back their debt. Generally, a lot of what government does is penalize responsibility and reward irresponsibility. And you're penalizing people who are responsible by paying off their debt. So this is an immoral policy, a financially irresponsible policy that could potentially will increase deficits and debt and potentially would increase inflation. And it is a reflection of the real evil, which is the underlying policy. And that underlying policy is the policy of state involvement in funding of education, which is just going to lead to a disaster, particularly the way it's done in America. Sometimes these mixtures of private and public are worse than the government just taking it over, because then you just know what it is. It's pure. Like the American healthcare system is such a mess. It's in some senses it would be easier to criticize it if it was just so socialized. Then we'd know what we were criticizing. Here it's this mishmash of socialism, some freedom and some private and some not. And how do you make sense of it? And how do you untangle it? And what is bad and what is good? And it's almost impossible. And the same with our educational system. And then the Europeans look at us and they think they're nuts because they have decent universities and they don't pay any tuition. It's free for many of them. And they look at us and they think we're nuts, taking on $250,000 of debt. Now, my argument is that $250,000 debt is because government is involved. Because the government finances it. Because we're in a mixed economy. We're not. And of course, in many respects, Europeans pay for that education, quote, free, in their tax code. Europeans generally are just better at the redistribution. They've accepted it, they accept it, they don't challenge it, and therefore it just gets done. In America, we redistribute, but we pretend we're not. We're giving them loans. We're not really giving them, everything is pretend. We play pretend constantly. All right, my shtick on the horrific loan forgiveness program that the Biden administration is engaged in, immoral, impractical, and I don't even think it'll buy him many votes. And it certainly pisses off a lot of people. All right, let's see. We are going to take some Super Chat questions. Okay, we're only $18 away from the goal. But I have to say, today's the last day of the month. And the last day of the month, we usually kind of expand the goal and stretch it out a little bit and make it a little bit bigger, because particularly this month, which has been a low month because I traveled so much and we didn't have so many shows. So it would be great if we reached a little bit, right? Reached out, and Troy did a lot of the work here. He did a lot of the heavy lifting. So a lot of you guys, are free riding here. And now some of you are monthly supporters, and that's great, but I know that a lot of you listening don't support the show yet. I hope many of you do. If you get value from it, value for value, show that value. And one way to show that value is to participate in the Super Chat here. For any amount. Of course, large amounts are particularly appreciated because they get us past our goals. Catherine would love to make this a $1,000 night rather than a $650 night. But you can also support the show at YaronBrookShow.com/support, Patreon, and Subscribe Star. All right, value for value. I create a lot of these for a week when I'm in town. and many of you consume at least some of them, if not all of them, well, how much is it worth to you? $2, $10, $100, $1,000, however much it's worth to you. It would be great if you showed your appreciation by contributing that amount. All right, David, thank you. Really appreciate the support. All right, let's see if there are any questions related to this. Brian says, I'm part of the folks who might have their debt erased. Should I be waiting to see if the bill is passed, pay only the interest, or simply wait and see if it all actually comes through and pay nothing? I don't know. This is not a bill. It's an executive order, so it's a done deal. So there's not a lot of time that's going to pass. Brian, thank you for the support, both the support, the question and the support. You're gonna get the money. It's going to happen. I would look on some of the government websites to see what are the logistics of it, and I don't know exactly what the logistics of it are. You're going to have to figure that out and find out and figure out what the best strategy is to deal with it. But again, this is not a bill that you're going to have to wait for it to pass. It's already done because it's an executive order. Now, it might be challenged in court, but you see, it's not clear who has standing to challenge it in court. Maybe somebody who's not getting it, who paid off their debt. I'm not sure if the courts would recognize a standing there. So it's not clear who would sue. So it's going to be interesting to watch and see if there is a lawsuit, what it looks like. All right, let's see. Michael says, it is extremely predatory for government to be giving 18-year-olds hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans for degrees in left-handed puppetry. I don't blame anyone for taking advantage of the loan forgiveness program. No, I don't blame them either, absolutely. Oh, I did want to make this point. Thanks, Michael, you've reminded me of this point. So a lot of people on the left are saying to Republicans don't know exactly how to answer this. Look, you gave PPP loans to businesses, all kinds of businesses. And some of you actually took it during the pandemic, during COVID. So you helped out a struggling sector. We're helping up a struggling sector. Now, this is the difference. I'm not justifying the PPP loans here, but there is a big difference. The difference is that the government basically shut those businesses down. The government forced them to lay off people, to go out of business, or to shut their businesses down. The government is the one that created the crisis. Now, you could argue here that the government also created the crisis by giving out the loans, but that, of course, nobody is arguing because everybody loves the idea the government gives out loans. So, when the government breaks it and then comes in and tries to help people out once it is broken, that's, I think, different. Then the government just decides to send checks to a sector that it just feels like, and not a sector that's that necessarily needy, but just a sector in the economy that it wants to, students in this case. So then the Democrats say, well, but you guys all supported stimulus checks to people during COVID, like Trump, what was it, 2, 3 checks, and many Republicans supported the Biden checks. And again, while I'm not supportive of those either, again, the difference is that these are programs to compensate people for the damage the government imposed on them. Now, some of those businesses would have struggled anyway. Some people would have lost their jobs anyway. But many of those businesses and most of those jobs were lost because of government incompetence, because of government lockdowns, because of government coercion, because of government programs. The government failed us in COVID and then paid us to keep quiet. All right. Let's see. I'm just looking to see if there are other related question. Joni says, Obungla, I don't know what Obungla means. I assume that's Obama, used a Republican plan for ACA, yes, and stripped out the public options to go figure. Yeah, it was a plan put together by the Heritage Foundation, not just Republican, but a conservative foundation, right? It was. This is the problem of running Mitt Romney as a candidate for president in 2012, because Mitt Romney supported the Massachusetts plan, which is basically Obamacare in Massachusetts. So yeah, this is the problem. Republicans are wimps at best. Frank says, Yuan, does a person have a right to an education? No. I mean, you don't have a right to be provided with an education. You have a right to seek an education. You have a right to choose who to educate you. You have a right to decide how much money to spend on education. You have a right to take out loans if you can get them for an education. You don't have a right to an education. You don't have a right to somebody else's time, somebody else's effort, somebody else's money, somebody else's stuff. You don't have a right to somebody else provide you with something that you didn't earn. So rights, this is the principle. You cannot have a right to somebody else's stuff, time, effort, money, energy, talent. Rights cannot be to things. Rights are just the recognition that you're free to go out there and seek an education. Nobody has a right to stop you from seeking an education through voluntary exchange. It's not negative rights. Rights are not negative. Rights are positive. They are rights to action, to positive action, to take action, free of coercion. That's a positive, that's not a negative. Rights are not prevent harm from you. No, rights are there to facilitate you for pursuing your values, to make that possible. And to make that possible requires elimination of force. So no, the whole idea of negative versus positive rights is a complete misconception. It's a wrong conception of rights. It's a right to something. In that sense, it's positive. But it's not to a thing. It's to action, to freedom. All right, thanks, Frank. Proper says, just wanted to add there is a cap on undergraduate student loans at $5,000 if you don't have a co-signer. My dad was bankrupt when I started college, so I had to get a private loan with 19% interest rate. Yeah, I mean, private loans are harder because private loans, they adjust the interest rate to reflect the risk that you won't pay them back. So, 19% interest rate, wow, that is very high. But I appreciate that you went the private route, but you have to pay tuition. This is the injustice, right, to you, is that you had to pay tuition that is under the assumption that government is providing loans. And distorts the price and forces you to pay a higher tuition, and therefore forces you to go into greater debt because you couldn't get a cosigner. All right. Let's see. We've got a bunch of questions on all kinds of topics. We're at, all right, I'm going to note here where we are in terms of the super chat. We're at $750, so we're inching closer to where we need to be, and that's great. Catherine's doing her job. There's Catherine contributing $5. Catherine actually not only promotes the show, but actually contributes to it. All right, so we're going to jump into the super chat. We have a lot of super chat questions. This show today is going to go for a long time in order for me to catch up with all the super chat questions, but a lot of good super chat questions. Feel free to come up with your own questions. It's going to be a while. Friend Harper, $50. Thank you. That is really generous. Really, really appreciate it. Friend Harper says, I really liked your recent uploads to the podcast channel that are interviews. These are a lot of old interviews that I've never put up on YouTube or that I've never put up on a podcast I've uploaded. So I'm glad you're enjoying them. Here's for the value for those. Thank you, $50. Appreciate that. Keep up the great work advocating objectivism across the world. I will, and that reminds me, I'll just mention that on the 13th of this month, I will be flying to Korea and then to Tokyo. And I will be doing a series of events in Tokyo. So if you live in Tokyo or anywhere in Japan and would like to come and see me, say hello, shake my hand, participate in a live event, you can find details of the events up on the Ayn Rand Institute website. You can also look for Ayn Rand Japan. There's Ayn Rand Society Japan or Tokyo. I can't remember the exact name. I'll get you the URL for future shows. And we're doing a talk at a university, and we're doing 2 talks, like seminars for the local group, and all of those are open to the public. So I'm hoping that if you live in Japan or live anywhere, in Japan, you come to Tokyo and we get to say hi, and it should be a lot of fun to meet you. You can meet other objectivists, and it'll be a blast. I will then be in Korea, where my book, Equal is Unfair, is coming out in Korean. I think it's already in print, or at least I hope it is, because we're doing a book launch event, I think on the 19th of September. Again, that will be open to the public. We'll have information about that. If you live in Korea, we'll have information about that event up on my website, YaronBrookShow.com, and up on the Ayn Rand Institute website, so you can come to that. I will then also be speaking at a conference, a big conference. It's probably quite expensive, in Seoul, South Korea, which will be interesting. That'll be interesting. The conference, I'm speaking on a panel with Ed Fullner. Ed Fullner, who is the former CEO, I think the founder of the Heritage Foundation, so a real conservative, very well connected, both in Korea and, of course, in the United States in conservative politics. And Mark Skousen, the guy who runs Freedom Fest, an economist, who is, I guess, a prominent libertarian economist. So I'll be speaking on the panel with both of those about the future of freedom in Korea. So that is going to be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to that. Then, just so you know that I'm not slacking off, I'm going to fly from Korea to São Paulo in Brazil through New York. God, it's so difficult to get from Asia to South America. You can't fly direct. There are no flights direct from anywhere in Asia to anywhere in South America. Crazy. We will be, the Ayn Rand Institute is putting out 2 conferences in South America, one in São Paulo and one in Buenos Aires. So if you live in Brazil, I hope you're coming to the one in São Paulo. If you live in Argentina or anywhere else in Latin America, Spanish-speaking Latin America, please come to Buenos Aires. They're going to be great conferences. I'm giving a number of talks in them. Tara Smith is going to be at the conference in Buenos Aires. You got to see Tara Smith live if you're in Latin America. So please come to the conferences. If you're anywhere in the region, it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be terrific. In between those 2 conferences, I will be speaking in one other city in Brazil, Curitiba, and potentially in other cities in Brazil, or I might be going to the food capital of South America, which is Lima, Peru, and I might be in Lima, Peru, maybe for an event. So I will keep you updated, but that's the plan. 2.5 weeks of bam, bam, bam through the world. I hope to do a lot of interviews, a lot of talks. I hope they're all videotaped. I hope we can put them up for you after the fact, and I'll keep putting up content like that. Then, in October, I'll be going to Europe for another 2.5 weeks. And again, if you are involved in a group in Europe and would like to have me come and speak, let me know. We can probably arrange something. We have a few open dates still. So let us know. If you think you can get 50 people together, send me an email, yaron@yaronbrookshow.com, and we will try to make an event possible. Same, by the way, if you run a group in Brazil and would like me to come to your city in Brazil and you think you can put 50 people together, we will try to do that as well. So anyway, just quick update on that. All right, back to the Super Chats. I'm going through the $20 questions. There were a lot of them. And then we'll get to the... so from now on, like on the Super Chat, from this point on, only $20 questions, because otherwise we'll be here all night. Only $20 questions. You can contribute like JRTI just did $10. Less than that if you want, but if you're going to ask a question, make it $20 or more. Austin, I just said $20 or more for questions. So please put them up on the $20. So if we're gonna stay here all night, at least we make it lucrative. Because, for money, I'm willing to answer questions all night. It just has to be enough. Right? All right. Mika asks, do you have any recommendations for artists that do paintings inspired by Rand's novels? The only artist I know that does paintings inspired by Rand's novels is, I'm terrible with names. Quinn Coder sells his art, and his name is, I had, in the previous apartment in Puerto Rico, I had one of his artworks up on the wall behind me. See, Lawson, obviously, you can tell that some of his paintings are inspired by Rand's novel. Brian Lawson, you can get them at Quinn Coder's gallery. In terms of inspired directly from the novels, that's the only artist I know. Of course, Gaetano, the guy who did the covers of Atlas Shrugged, the ones that are very Art Deco, he was inspired. Of course, he did the covers. That was the inspiration. So you can find some of that art, I think, Quinn Coder's gallery. So if you're interested in that, check out Quint Coder Gallery. I don't know that John Wass is inspired by the novels directly. He does still lifes. He's done some pretty amazing still lifes. But I don't know. Sometimes the novels appear in the still life, but I wouldn't consider that inspired by. I don't think he does like scenes out of, which I think Brian Lawson does, or at least you can almost imagine a certain scene, a certain of his paintings being characters out of Atlas Shrugged being there. All right, Jason asks, do you think corporate stock should be as easily and anonymously transferable as crypto is? Could we benefit by a company issuing coin at par in lieu of its shares, or do you think it might lead to adverse market effects? No, I'm a big believer that companies should be allowed to issue coins. I think we should at least experiment with it and see how it plays out in the marketplace. And what it Austin, thank you. I didn't mean to put pressure on you to push it up to $20, but I appreciate it. So I have no problem with anonymity. I think the exchanges in a free market would have to decide whether they would allow for anonymity in stock trading. I don't see any reason why you couldn't have coins dominating trading and coins acting as equity. But you need a market to play it out and see what is the best way to trade stock and what's the most efficient way and what's the way in which it produces the best, highest quality prices, best and highest quality information. And I think to do that, what you need to do is massively to deregulate equity markets, trading markets, stock markets. Stock markets are heavily, heavily regulated. Every aspect of them is regulated. In many respects, the stock market is still using technology of the late 20th century rather than the technology of the 21st century. So there's a lot that could be improved if we just deregulated and allowed for freedom in innovation in stock trading. And coins, crypto coins, was one such innovation. And of course, the regulators have stepped in and banned using coins as equity. JJ Jigbees. It's been a while since you've asked a question. I remember your name, so it's a while since I've heard of it. I've had an ever-growing and intense interest in ancient Greece history. Audio courses, illustrated history books, historical novels. I consume a lot. What's the wisest way to employ this profitless hobby? Am I wasting time? Oh, no. No, I mean, you're not wasting time for several reasons. One is you're enjoying it. I mean, what's the purpose of doing stuff? It's to enjoy it. It's just the pure pleasure of doing it. So, and it's, now beyond that, it's intellectual, it's stimulating. You're learning history, which is a guide to the future. You know, you're growing. The novels are inspiring you, and they're providing you with all kind of, you know, what the effect that art has on our epistemology, the effect that art has on the way we view the world. So you're benefiting from the art that is coming out of Greece. You know, Greece is maybe the most important period in all of human history, ancient Greece, in the sense that everything that followed is in one way either an acceptance or rejection of Greece. Greece is responsible for the modern world. It's responsible for the Enlightenment and what happened. Coming out of the Enlightenment, Greece is everything. So it's wonderful. You don't have to monetize it. You can if you want, but just doing it and enjoying it and learning from it and appreciating it and stimulating your mind and sharpening your mind and gaining the knowledge is enough. You could, I don't know, you could start a YouTube channel where you educate other people about Greece and about the history of Greece. I don't know how old you are. I don't know what your professional interests are, but if you wanted to go into philosophy, you'd have a running start. If you wanted to go into history, you had a running start. You could study it professionally and then become a teacher, a professor, a writer. You could decide to do anything you want with it if you want to do that, but you could also just keep it as a hobby. Hobbies are great. Hobbies are great. All right, Austin, how would an objectivist tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley conduct themselves? How would they handle interviews with media when asked about misinformation, as well as antitrust claims when testifying before Congress? Well, I think that they would depending on you know who their investors were and the extent to which their business was at risk or not, depending on their answers, they would either be completely straightforward and honest and bold and out there in their views, or they would be non-committal. They would, if they're put in a position where telling the truth is suicide, then they would find ways to not tell the truth, but not at the same time endorse evil ideas and promote an evil ideology. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult to navigate in the world in which we live, where so much of that world is dictated by political correct ideas. But look, look at this guy who just started a investment firm that is anti-ESG. It's going to invest in companies that are not ESG. And he's raised huge amounts of money. He's done phenomenally well by going against the common ideas and the common views. And I bet you that there's tons of venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, there are tons of investors who would appreciate somebody actually standing up and telling the truth. And I hope that the day will come. I hope when the day will come where objectivist entrepreneurs stand up and tell it like it is and don't feel like they have to, in order to attract employees, in order to attract capital, in order to attract whatever, feel that they have to play some kind of intellectual game not to offend anybody. It's time that we started offending people. I'm all for offending people. And maybe the trick is you have to wait until you become successful. But the problem with waiting is that often what happens is that you get used to the game, you get used to pretending, you get used to being in the closet, and then you never do, even when the cost is small. I mean, everybody said, oh, Alan Greenspan will come out and for laissez-faire capitalism when the day is, well, the day was always there. Everybody was listening. There's very little they could do to him. Even in the day that he retired, he could have come out for laissez-faire capitalism, and he didn't. I mean, if you want a model of cowardice, if you want a model of unprincipled, lack of integrity, dishonesty. Just track Alan Greenspan's career. I mean, he is a living Stadler from Atlas Shrugged. He is a living Stadler. He is the guy who knew, who understood, who got it, and then betrayed it all. Betrayed it all. And had every opportunity, at no cost to him, at least no cost that we know of, to reveal it. And didn't. Didn't advocate for the ideas. He could have changed, in many respects, he could have had a massive impact. A massive impact. The guy everybody listened to, the guy everybody admired. Imagine if he'd come out for laissez-faire capitalism. Imagine if he told Congress what he really thought about them. If he told the president what he really thought. This would have had a massive impact on the movement, on the world. But he didn't. He's a coward, lacks integrity. Daniel asked, after the fall of the Soviet Union, did you think at the time that socialism, communism, collectivism ideas would die? What were you thinking at the time? Was there hope Rand's ideas would be accepted more? I mean, there's always hope that Rand's ideas will be accepted more, but no, I did not think that communism, collectivist ideas were finished. I did not. I did not think, I mean, maybe I was young. I did not think that it was as momentous an event as I later think it was. I thought it would be squandered. I think it would be squandered. I thought it would be squandered. It was. Because I understood even then that the battle we face is a philosophical one. And that the philosophy of communism, and certainly the philosophy of collectivism, had not yet been undermined. That there was no widespread rejection of collectivism. The collectivism was still embraced by people, still adopted by people, still upheld by people as an ideal. And as a consequence, while we might not get communism, this particular form of collectivism might disappear, collectivism would not, statism would not. They were here for the long run. It was just an issue of, for a while it would be easier for us because communism collapsed. For a while, maybe we would have some momentum towards freedom, and we did for about 10 years, but that all disappeared with 9/11. All disappeared with 9/11. And yeah, I always think Rand's ideas will be more popular than they turn out to be. I'm an eternal optimist in that sense. Because I don't get, in a deep, deep sense, I don't get why people don't get it. Because I get it, and I'm not that special. Applejack, so glad to hear you and your wife are okay after the accident. I appreciate that. Thank you, Applejack. Thank you for your teaching me how to think. I quote you to my wife almost every day. I hope she's forgiving of that. And she's becoming more objective because of it. Excellent. You're a national treasure. I really appreciate it. Thank you, and thank you for the support. I really appreciate it. Brian. Brian's on a roll here. All right, Brian says, in your view, what is a too young partner? There was a lady who is young but old enough to know what's up. But I feel as though it's not my true potential. She seems of similar nonchalance, however. I don't want to exploit emotions. God, I mean, I don't really understand the question. So should you date somebody significantly younger than you? Is that the question? I mean, it really depends on the person. It depends on how mature she is, how emotionally mature, how intellectually mature she is. If you get the kind of values from her that you want to get from a romantic partner, which I assume we're talking about romance here. I don't think there's a cookie-cutter rule for what it is. It can be, I mean, the woman could be older than you, and that's fine. You could be older than her by a lot. And I know people who've had those relationships, and that's fine. I think it really depends on the individuals, it depends on the people, it depends on their maturity, it depends on their interest. I don't think there's a rule. And, don't date children. Make sure they're, assuming you're of legal age, they're of legal age. So I don't know how old you are. I don't know what you're talking about. Are we talking about polyamory? Wait a second. What are we talking about? I don't know what we're talking about. So I don't know what it means that they're younger, how much younger, and how young you are. I mean, if you're 25, don't date 16-year-olds. But if you're 25, could you date 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds? Sure. If you're 30, could you date 18-year-olds? Probably. Doesn't quite mesh because an 18-year-old is not very mature, and you by 30 should be expecting something more than an 18-year-old. But there could be an exceptional 18-year-old. So I don't think there's a rule. It really is. Okay, so you're asking about polyamory, but he's 30. So I don't know where the polyamory in this question is, maybe in the next question, but I'm not sure where the polyamory is. In your view, what is too young a partner? There is a lady who is young but not old enough. I don't think there's a rule for that. Let me skip to your second question. Maybe I'll understand better. Recently, I met what I call a golden person. However, he's a polygamist. But he has the life and values I adore, despite not choosing the best for himself. There is one. How does one interact? God, I need you to really, you're asking me questions that are obviously personal, and you're giving me too little information to really give you a good answer. So I'm getting fragments, and I'm not getting the question. So I apologize, because I'm not actually getting it. Look, I mean, you're going to meet people who are great and flawed. And, okay, so Brian says, and yes, I should be expecting something more. She's in her 20s. So first, if you're expecting something more, then go for the more. If she's in her 20s and you're 30, then the age is not the issue. The issue is the more, right? The issue is how much more, what more. And you want to get the best person you can. Mark, thank you. $50. Really appreciate that. That is fantastic. With regard to this golden person, I just don't know. I mean, is the fact that he's a polygamist, is that a fatal flaw? Well, it depends how honest he is about it. Is he deceiving anybody? Is he involved in actual deception? I wouldn't get involved with a person who deceived other people, who was lying. That would be not acceptable. Lying is unbelievably destructive, and therefore a big no-no. So, what is he? What is he doing? How bad is it? And what are the values he represents for you? And can you interact on the values without engaging in the bad behavior? How do you not get sucked into the bad behavior? Can you influence him to become a better person? Those are all kind of things that you would have to consider in assessing whether to have a relationship with such a person or not. But again, I'm not getting enough information to fully, and maybe it's not polygamous, maybe it's a polyamorous, which is different. But either way, I think you have to figure out what kind of relationship you want to have with this person. And he's not lying, but in chat with his partners, it's obviously awkward. They all know what's going on. If everybody knows what's going on, then it's not your problem in that sense, right? It's not your problem. It's their choices that they're making, and if some of them are making mistakes, they're making mistakes. But it's their choices. If it's all up front, if it's all known, then that's fine. But you need to figure out what kind of relationship you want with them and what values you're actually getting. And if they're making mistakes, how do you avoid getting sucked into those mistakes? All right. Austin, what do you think the different values in dating, sex, marriage, between conservatives, progressives, and objectivists? Are progressives and socialist collectivists in their personal lives and finances only with tax dollars? Oh, wow. Roosevelt, thank you for the support. Really appreciate that. We're really hitting our stride here. We're very close to making the $1,000 goal for today. Thanks to all the questions and to Mark and to Roosevelt. So really appreciate that. Let's see. So let's take sex, because I think sex is kind of pivotal here. It relates to dating and to some extent relates to marriage. I think there are differences between progressives, conservatives, and objectivists. I think generally progressives have a materialistic view of life. This comes out of Marxism. What matters is the material. And therefore what matters in sex is the physical pleasure. And therefore sex is, you can have sex with anybody. It doesn't really matter. All that matters is the physical pleasure. All that matters is the orgasm in a sense, so it doesn't matter who you have sex with. So they're much more likely to sleep around, to be promiscuous than others, because what they value is the physical part of it, and they don't expect and they don't have any spiritual connection with they don't associate sex with anything spiritual. So they're much more likely to date promiscuously, to have sex quicker, to have more sex, and they're probably more likely to get married out of kind of pragmatic reasons often, and to get divorced more often, would be my guess. But they're also, which is a value, they're more likely to get out of a marriage if it's not working, if they don't feel right. It's all about emotions, right? They're more likely to get out of a marriage than stay in a bad marriage. So let's take conservatives. Conservatives tend to have less sex, tend to reject the physical side of sex, tend to reject pleasure for the sake of pleasure, focus only on the spiritual values, and some, depending on how religious they are, to focus purely on the procreation aspects of sex, or on what they would consider the inevitable animalistic aspects of sex, and therefore you have it, but you feel guilty about it. If you've read Atlas Shrugged, Reardon's little speech to Dagny after they have sex is very reflective of a conservative attitude towards sex. You got to do it because it's the urge, it's instinctual, you can't help it, but it's kind of ugly and not good. So they have a very unhealthy attitude towards sex, which is, in a sense, the opposite of the progressives. In some sense, it's the same, because they're rejecting sex as a whole. They're rejecting sex as an integrated part of life. And therefore, you find more and more conservatives who only have sex within marriage, or only have sex after 500 dates, or only have sex if they expect marriage, or limit their sex and the experiences with sex quite significantly, because they're significantly anti-pleasure, and they don't want that. Also, conservatives are more likely to only marry people, I think, that they have a real connection to. But then if it's a bad marriage, I think they probably tend to stick with it. They tend to stick with a bad marriage, which is not healthy for them, their kids, or anybody else. You probably have less divorce where there should be divorce than among progressives. So they're less likely to be attuned to whether the marriage is working well, and they have a kind of dogmatic commitment to the marriage. And on the other hand, I don't know what the stats are, but conservatives, religious conservatives here, I would say, also prone to cheating and then feeling very guilty about it. And they're also prone to, I think, substitutes to cheating. So I think we talk about strip clubs on one of the shows, but I think the best, fanciest, luxurious strip clubs are in the most Christian areas in the country. I think Christians probably go to strip clubs more than progressives. Because they're looking for outlets. It's like the dirty thing you have in the closet, but you kind of have to look, or you have to engage in it. You have to, my guess is you have, that's true of prostitution, and it's probably true of I don't know, massage parlors and stuff. I think those are probably consumed more by conservatives than progressives. Progressives just go to a bar and pick up a girl. And I think conservatives will probably pay for it more and then feel horribly guilty about it and so on. Conservatives have a very unhealthy relationship to sex. So do progressives, by the way. So do progressives. I mean, St. Louis, you have to be really careful here. Yuan is referring to Protestants. No, so the Catholics, as if Catholics don't have that, right? When Catholic priests are, locked up in celibacy, then what they do is abuse boys or girls. There's no way an unhealthy attitude towards sex, which Christianity has, a very, very, very unhealthy view of sex, both in Catholicism and in Protestantism, leads to perversion. And that perversion come out in a variety of different ways. So I don't believe any religion has a healthy view of sex. How does an objectivist view it? And, that's a whole lecture. But basically, objectivists view sex as an integration of mind and body. Objectivists value the pleasure aspect of sex. They also value the spiritual connection that is associated with the shared values. They look to have sex with people who have values that they share with them. They're not promiscuous, but they're not also, committed to having sex only in marriage, or committed to having very little sex. They're committed to having sex with people they like, the people that share their values, and casual sex in that context is they would have, but just not at the kind of promiscuous level, not kind of offhand. And they're searching constantly for that spiritual connection that combines both the pleasure and the values associated with it. That is that, and as a consequence, I think, I don't know about marriage, if marriages last longer or not, but I think objectivists just should have a super healthy attitude towards sex. Sex is a good thing. It's easy to talk about sex. It's not some mystery. It's not some ugly thing. It's not some hidden thing. It's just an important aspect of human life, and therefore we should be willing and able to talk about it and discuss it and debate it and disagree about it and figure it out scientifically. And marriage is a intense, important, long-term relationship that one has, and you have to be very attuned to whether it's working or not. You want it to work. You want to work for it to work. It has to be oriented around values, around shared values, and the same with dating. You don't just date for the sex. You date because it's a human being you enjoy being with, you get value from, and the more you love that individual, the more meaningful and the better, from a pleasure perspective, the sex is, and the more likely it is you marry them. And as I've said on previous shows, I think it's immoral not to have sex before marriage. That is, with a person you're going to marry. I don't think you should get married with anybody before you've had sex with them. I think that would be wrong. I think it would be irrational. I think it would be mystical, right? It would be some faith-based, you have faith that you can connect sexually. I mean, that's absurd and ridiculous. It's too important a part of life to leave as a mystery before you sign a long-term contract. Before you sign the long-term contract, you want to make sure you like having sex with this person. All right, yield. Thank you. Let's see. Hi, you're on 2 questions. If you had $20,000 in student loans, would you apply for loan forgiveness programs? Yeah, absolutely. Why not? The government is offering you to pay back money. You're going to pay for this in the future as a taxpayer. You pay for it in the complete crazy inefficiencies of the government. Absolutely. I was pro businesses applying for PPP loans. I'm pro students for getting their loan money forgiven by the government. If the government's offering it, why should only the bad guys get it? And then second, this is a question that came up in my CS class. Should something that is not considered a person have rights as a person? No. If you're not considered a person, you don't have a right. Person, human being, rights are exclusively for human beings. And if you're not a human being, an individuated, separate, individual human being, you don't have rights. All right, friend Harper, $20. By the way, we're $20 short of $1,000. So we're very, very, very close. I have a feeling we're going to make it. All right, friend Harper, is it fine to call a fantasy book romantic if it portrays man as they could be and should be and seeks values? Yes. Objectivist in a world with different, what are some ways people use the term romantic? God, again, you write these questions where the grammar doesn't make any sense. Thank you for the support, but I don't really understand the question because grammar is important. This is an example of why grammar is important, because I can't understand what you're saying. Grammar helps one understand what one is saying. Yes, a fantasy book can be romantic. Romantic in the Randian, in objectivist sense, means it projects choice, projects free will, projects values, projects the ability of human beings to choose between values. So romanticism is about valuing and choosing between values and showing man as capable of those kind of choices. Free trade, thank you for the support. You put us at $999.58. And Brian just took us over the $1,000 with his $20 contribution. Thank you. So that's what romantic means. Romantic also refers to an era in art, particularly in painting and literature in the early 19th century and into the mid to late 19th century. And it was identified based on the emotion conveyed by the painting and the characters. And so realism combined with emotion. And Rand interpreted the fact that when people had emotions, they had passionate about something, they were valuers. And in that sense, because they were valuers, there was an implied that if you're a valuer, well, you chose these values. That being a valuer is being romantic. So art that projects valuing is art that is romantic. And so a lot of those paintings, a lot of that literature, that's what makes it romantic. And that's consistent with both the objectivist definition of romantic art and the historical period which it's associated with. All right, Brian asks, I know it's pathetic to return to this avenue, but the man I was talking about obviously loves the woman who bears his child, but he still messes around with others. But his lady somehow doesn't have a problem with it. What the F? You know, don't try to understand intimate relationships between other people. You don't know what's going on there. You don't know if she has a problem or doesn't have a problem. You don't know if she's not messing around as well. You don't know if she really thinks that she has a rational reason for letting him mess around. You don't know what the dynamics of the relationship is. You can't. And don't try. If he's honest, if he's not deceiving, and if he's not messing around with just stupid stuff, right? Then why does anybody care? I have no problem with people experimenting with relationships and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And human psychology is complicated and hard. And it's I think if she really cares for him and doesn't care, then first that means to me that she has a lot of self-esteem. The fact that she can handle the fact that he is not exclusive with her. But it also is a question of how much does he care about, how much does she care about him? It's a complicated psychological question, and I think I wouldn't jump to judge them, is my point. And these are psychological issues that are hard to judge from the outside. It's the best I can do. I'm not willing to condemn. I think ultimately these are mistakes. I think ultimately as they grow up, that won't sustain itself. I think ultimately he'll either be committed to this one woman or they'll break up and he'll do something else. But it's not like I believe that at every point in life, monogamy is the only solution. Monogamy is the only alternative. Monogamy is the best way one can handle. I think long term it probably is. But is it at every point in time? Is it at every given point with every relationship, in every stage in life? I'm not convinced of that. All right. All right. That was just the $20 questions. Now we have a whole slew of questions that are not $20 questions. And James G., you asked a question that's not $20 after I asked only $20 questions be asked. I think I'll forgive you because you asked so many questions. But all right, only $20 questions from now on being asked. I will go through these ones because they were asked, and I promise to answer all the questions. And of course, $50 questions get priority, $100 questions get even greater priority, but minimum of $20 from now on. Francis writes, Yuan, a little over a year ago, you introduced me to Ayn Rand, and last week I was accepted into Ayn Rand University as a graded student. You're one of my heroes. Thank you. Oh, I am so excited to hear that and pleased that you're a graded student. Nothing more important from my perspective, from my values right now than graded students at the ARU and people being trained by the, in objectivism, to be the future intellectuals, to be the future, articulators of these ideas and appliers of these ideas and bringing these ideas to the world. It'll be your generation, Francis, that ultimately changes the world. So yes, I'm happy. I mean, this is what makes my day. This is what makes my day. And he's paying in Turkish lira. So you in Turkey? That's even more interesting. Because I've for a long time argued that objectivism as a global movement is much more powerful because then we get to draw on the talent from everywhere around the world. And having somebody from Turkey, not a great place to be right now, but is truly fabulous. All right, Veldrin says, why do Germans dominate European economics? Why are they so efficient and innovative? Why do Eastern Europe, Spain, Italy, France lag behind? I mean, there were a number of reasons for that. You have to look at education and the rigor of education as part of that, and the fact that Germany has a very rigorous system about, I think, and maybe the Germans can correct me, about channeling people to where they can be most productive. I don't know how many Germans go into gender studies and whether the state really encourages that. So German education is very big on skills, on getting people the skills that they need. So you get a lot of very skilled manual labor. In Germany, you get very fine manufacturing abilities. You get strong push towards engineering. So culture matters. And German culture is oriented towards those kind of skilled professions and towards encouraging children to go into those and structuring the educational system to focus on that. German economic policy has favored manufacturing and has favored as being pretty good. Germany, since World War II, has favored a stable currency. The Deutsche Mark was very stable while Europe's neighbors, Germany's neighbors were hyperinflating or inflating. So Germany's had a long track record of kind of stability, economic stability. The German people culturally are detail-oriented and productive. Now, again, that's a generalization, but again, the culture values that, the culture promotes that, the culture encourages that, and you get that, and it also focuses and encourages work and self-reliance up to a point, right? So there is welfare, and it is a welfare state, but there is a certain cultural expectation of work, and I think those are the reasons. I don't know how innovative Germany is at the big picture. I think the UK is much more innovative. France, surprisingly, has some innovation, but none of them match the United States for innovation. So I'm not sure how innovative Germany really is. It's great at getting better and better at better manufacturing something and making it more and more and more efficient, but do they make the breakthroughs? No, not really. Not really. Why Spain and Italy lag, and France to some extent? They have different cultures. They have a culture, for example, in France that emphasizes government work over work in the private sector, bureaucracy over productivity. France has labor laws that are much worse than Germany's. Germany's are bad. France's are worse. Italy and Spain have horrible labor laws. They have a history of socialism, history of powerful labor unions, much more powerful than the German labor unions. German labor unions have been much more reasonable in terms of the wage negotiations. The Italians and Spanish have not been. Italy, Spain also have a different culture of work, a culture that is less oriented towards productivity, less oriented towards work, less oriented towards hard work. Again, generalization, but you know, Germans don't take a siesta between 2 and 4. Italy and in Spain to this day, parts of the economy take a siesta, and certainly 30, 40 years ago, much of the economy took a siesta. Everybody went to sleep between 2 and 4. So those are some of the reasons. I'm sure there are others as well. But, you know, Italy suffers significantly from a dabbling and a commitment to socialism that it had for a very long time. Its intellectuals had, and its workers had. All right, Liam, whenever you get a rental car, get the absolute thickest, biggest, safest car they have. The reason people in California drive drunk in the middle of the day is because they're miserable nihilists. Maybe, you know, I don't know. I don't want to generalize from this one driver to all drivers in California, but, you know, and I've lived in California, and I was just in California. And I have to admit that in spite of everything, I don't find Californians miserable nihilists, at least not the ones I interact with. California is still the best place to live on planet Earth if you could get rid of the politicians and the taxes and the regulations. It's just, the people are fantastic, they're productive. It's why California can keep doing the stupid things that it does. It's because Californians are so productive. So I wouldn't slam Californians quite so eagerly. But yes, I take your point about getting a big, thick, safe car. I took the small SUV. I should have got the big SUV. I don't like driving big SUVs. That's the problem. Michael says, you say there will be an exponential growth point in objectivism. Are we starting to see the very beginning of it now? At the beginning of exponential, it's very hard to tell it's exponential. Ask me in 10, 15 years, and I'll have a better answer. I'll have better data, and I'll be at the end of my career looking backwards. It'll be easier for me to articulate the case. James says, is anti-aging research coming of age? Do you expect to see benefits in your lifetime? I think some benefits in my lifetime, yes. I think, you know, I go back and forth on this, but generally I think there's quite a bit that's hyped in anti-aging science. I mean, I know I talked about Sinclair the other day, but now I've heard from some objectivist researchers in anti-aging that Sinclair's a hack and he's not as good as some people think he is. So it's really hard to tell as a layman who is right and who's wrong. But my suspicion is that aging is much harder than what some people like Sinclair suggest to us, right? So I think it's much harder than it appears. Jack, any comment on Blake Masters' change to pro-choice? Well, I don't think he's pro-choice. I think he changed from no abortion under any circumstances in any point during the primary to, okay, I'm for abortions in the first trimester, which is a big change and a good change, but nowhere near as a complete change. Yeah, I mean, look, I think Blake wants to win. I think Blake wants to win. I don't think Blake is as bad as the things that he said during the primaries. He was trying to appeal to Trump voters, so he said some horrible things in order to appeal to Trump voters. But I don't think he's that bad. But what it showed me is that he's willing to go there, and I think anybody who's willing to go there is dangerous, and I don't trust him. And his flip-flops, not just on this, on a bunch of different issues, from the primary to the general, Oz did the same thing, is not good, not healthy for the Republican Party, and not healthy for the future of America. And it is suggested these are people not to be trusted, that we don't know what they will do, and we don't know what the next flip-flop will be. Colt, sorry, I meant to say both of you. You're also 100% correct. Not going to argue with you. They're just a thought, just to make sure that that was clear. Sure, I completely understood, Colt. Wesley, just watched Wolf of Wall Street. I found Jordan Belfort a deeply inspirational character, an example of Randy, and here are their thoughts. Oh, God. I'm writing it down because I saw the movie a long time ago. I can't remember it that well, which suggests to me that I probably don't agree with you about his character, but I'm not in a position to actually articulate why. So let me watch the movie again, and I'll tell you if I do or don't agree with you on his character. Jeremy says Robert Massey wrote some really good books on Russian history, particularly his book on Peter the Great. That's great to know. Thanks, Jeremy. Jonathan says, what would happen if Trump is charged and then convicted? Would he run during the trial or even from prison? Who would challenge him for the nomination? No, I don't think he would run if he was in prison, and I doubt he would run if he was charged. I don't know what federal law is, if he's allowed to run. Certainly, I don't think he can run if he's in prison. And I'm not sure if he can run if he's charged, but I don't think he'd run. And I still have hope that the Republican Party wouldn't vote for him, but it's hard to tell. I do think he'll have challenges, particularly if he's charged, and particularly given that it looks like there's good reason to charge him. That is that he actually had classified information that he shouldn't have had. And if we're going to have equality before the law, I would be charged if I had those documents in my house. It seems reasonable that he should be charged, particularly given the nature of some of these documents. Now, we don't know that, and we'll find that out, I guess, if he is charged, what the nature of those documents is. But interesting. I'll be doing my reviews in the next few shows. So I will be doing reviews of the Star Trek, of A Patriot, and of the History of Philosophy Rap in latest this coming weekend. At least some of those. So, Catherine, have you or would you want to travel to Antarctica? Do you want to go to all 7 continents? Trying to figure out my next international trip. I mean, I do not expect ever to go to Antarctica. Not that interested. Going to all the 7 continents, I've been to all 7. I've been to 6, I think. I'm not that excited about going to the 7th, primarily because the trip there would require sailing there by ship in some of the roughest waters in the world. I'd get seasick. It would be horrible. Just not worth it. I don't enjoy being on ships in rough water. And I don't think you can go to Antarctica without that. So it's not that interesting to me. I'm not judging anybody who thinks it is, but to me it isn't. How can I bring objectivist values into the workplace or when I'm looking for a job, as well as during job interviews? I wouldn't do it. Not during job interviews. I mean, bring your values into job interviews. And when you're looking for a job, I mean, don't bring it up. Just act as a good person, as a moral person, as a person who has values and integrity. And I'd say the same thing about in the workplace. Just live up to the values. Live objectivism. That's the best thing you can do. Don't try to use the job interview to express opinions about things that are irrelevant to the job interview. Just answer the questions and express your confidence in your own ability and your confidence in your own values. Valdrin says, in 50 to 100 years, will Israel, or is that Russia, be wealthier? On a per capita GDP, Israel's already wealthier. What country is that? So anyway, I'll wait to see what country that is. But as a total wealth, there's a good chance Israel is wealthier. Austin, what do you think of the, oh, we answered this question. You just asked it in $20. Germany. Oh, in 50 years. Was that 50 years? 50 to 100 years. Wow, I don't know. It so depends on the path they take. It so depends on the path they take, right? It so depends on, just on GDP per capita. I think it's a toss-up. I think Israel could catch up to Germany even before that. Certainly not a total GDP, but a GDP per capita, I think it can catch up. But it really depends on the economic path it's hard to project 50 to 100 years out. Hopefully by then everybody is laissez-faire capitalist, and then we're all so super rich, it doesn't matter. James G., what are your favorite places to visit? Beaches. Oh, wow. Cities, mountains. Some of my favorite cities, London, Paris, New York, San Francisco. Did I just say San Francisco? San Francisco. And Rio de Janeiro, and Hong Kong used to be. Singapore might become. Shanghai used to be. I haven't been to Taiwan. I've been to Sao Paulo, not a favorite city. Vancouver's beautiful. Didn't spend a lot of time in Vancouver, but it is beautiful. I've been to Singapore. Interesting. I'd go back. Taiwan. I have not been to Taiwan, unfortunately. Best beaches, God. Beaches in Brazil are beautiful. Yeah, I mean, there's so many good beaches everywhere, right? There's just beautiful beaches here in Puerto Rico. There's beautiful beaches everywhere. Beautiful beaches in Thailand. I've been to Thailand. Thailand's a great place to visit. Mountains, New Zealand has glorious mountains. You know, Lord of the Rings? That's New Zealand. That scenery is New Zealand. Amazing. Love New Zealand. One of my favorite places to visit. I've only been there once. I'm eager to go back. Mountains in Norway, Switzerland is amazing. The Alps are amazing. But so are the Rockies. So is the Rockies. So is Hawaii. So, yeah, Hawaii has great beaches. So, God, there's so much beauty, so many different places around the world. They're all a little different. It's really hard to choose favorites, but they were all amazing. I don't think I've done Yaron's Rules for Living, travel the world. Have I done that? I can't remember if I've done that. But anyway, travel the world. James G. says, articles, polls show conservatives have better sex, give more to charity, and volunteer more than liberals, leftists who talk about these things. Why? I don't think they have better sex because they believe they have better sex. Because they have less promiscuous sex, and because they, I think, convince themselves they have better sex. I don't know how you measure who has better sex. I think that's a bogus stat. They give more to charity because they feel more guilty, because guilt is a feature of Christianity, and guilt you give to charity out of guilt. And I know conservatives, and I know why they give. They give because they feel guilty. And the same with volunteering. So they give more to charity and they volunteer more because they feel more guilty. Progressives tend to be secular. They have less of the Christian guilt. And they also are convinced that they can use the government to deal with those issues, and they don't feel like they have to do it personally because they don't feel personally guilty about it. Yeah, charity given by conservatives is not virtuous because it's given for the wrong reason. James G. asked, why does South America constantly go back to socialism every few decades Why do you think Brazil, Argentina never realized their potential? Because they've never embraced an individualistic philosophy. Because their philosophies have, they have embraced a collectivistic, altruistic, and Catholic, a religious perspective. And even when they're secular but inspired by Christianity, they've adopted continental philosophy, primarily German philosophy. The Enlightenment didn't have a big impact there. Even the French Enlightenment, but certainly the English, Scottish Enlightenment, never had an impact on Latin America. They very early on embraced Rousseau and the Germans. So they skipped over the good French. They went all the way to the bad French, Rousseau and Comte, Auguste Comte, and then to all the German philosophers. And that school of thought, that way of thinking, has dominated Latin America thought. They never got the Anglo-Saxon impact of the Enlightenment. Okay, Jonathan asked, Eugene Debs ran for president from prison in 1920, so Trump could if he wanted. Interesting, huh? You learn something every day. Yeah, I mean, I don't think Trump would win anyway, right? Certainly I don't think he'd win from prison. He might win the nomination, which is scary. Says something about the Republican Party that I even think that. But he won't win, I don't think, no matter if he runs for prison or not. But thank you, Jonathan, for enlightening me. I did not know that. All right, turns out I don't know everything. Shocking. Thanks, guys. Thanks for getting us to our goal of $1,000 today. That's fantastic. Thank you for Catherine, because it seems like Catherine does have magic, because she brings her game, and we get there. But thank you for all of you who participated today and who got us. Thank you for all of you who contribute to the show and make it possible, and contribute financially to compensate me for my time in putting these shows together. Wow, today's show was 2 hours and 15 minutes. I will see you all tomorrow. We're actually going to get a show tomorrow. And then on the weekend. And tomorrow we'll do, I don't know if all of the videos I owe you, but we'll do some of the reviews I owe you. And then we will take it from there. So I will see you all tomorrow, 8 p.m. Eastern Time.